Okay, good afternoon, Year Nines. And as you all know, unfortunately, we won't be having our usual lessons. So, what myself and Miss Farr are going to do is we're going to create some Loom videos for you to watch from home and complete your sociology work from home. So, this lesson, we're going to carry on with where we left off. As you know, we're on the unit of research methods, and our next lesson would have been on interviews. So, to do this, you will need a piece of paper and a pen in front of you. So if you could please write down the title interviews on your piece of paper. And I'm going to run you through what the learning objectives are for this lesson. So I want you to be able to describe the different types of interviews, to be able to compare the different types of interviews. And finally, what we're going to do is we're going to evaluate the usefulness of interviews. Now, for the starter activity, as you can see, there is a table on the board with 4 different types of interviews. Your task is to match up the type of interview to the correct definition. And as you can see, I've already done the first one for you. So structured interviews is when there is a set of standardized pre-written or preset questions which is read out by the researcher to the respondent. So your task is to copy out this table on your piece of paper, and I want you to match up the different types of interviews to the correct definition. So please pause this video now once you do that. Okay, and as hopefully you would have had a chance to complete the start activity. So if you could correct your answers, we're going to go through it now. So semi-structured interviews, as you may have worked out, is usually in the middle. So semi-structured interviews is somewhere in between a structured and unstructured interview, meaning that the researcher may well have a set of preset, pre-written questions, but it's semi-structured in the sense that the researcher may follow up on responses that the respondent provides, okay, to lead the way of the interview. Unstructured interviews is the opposite to structured interviews in the sense that it's very flexible, okay? So it's more like an open conversation. Instead of the researcher coming with a set of pre-written questions, the researcher may well just have a general set of ideas or topics that they want to discuss, but this is led entirely by the responses of the respondent, okay? The final one is focus groups. So this is when it's like a group interview. So several respondents are interviewed at once and they're allowed to discuss the questions being asked of them. So hopefully you would have had a chance to correct your work. If you haven't done so, please pause me and just do that. Okay, so I've got another question for you on the board. So out of structured and unstructured interviews, which one do you think is most like a questionnaire? So remember the last few lessons we've been looking at questionnaires, the different types of questionnaires. So I want you to have a go at this question. Write down the answer. So which one do you think is most like a questionnaire? And then finally, why do you think that is? Okay, so please pause this video once you do that. Okay, Yanaz, hopefully you would have had a chance to answer this question, and hopefully you would have written that structured interviews are most like a questionnaire. The reason being is because, as we know, in a questionnaire, the questions are obviously pre-written by the researcher because they may not be done in person. The respondent may take it home. So obviously the questions have already been written down, so they can't be unstructured. They're already written questions. Okay, so this is a recap to what we would have looked at the last few lessons. There's another question on the board. Do you think interviews produce qualitative or quantitative data? Again, we've looked at these 2 keywords the past few lessons, so hopefully you would know what this is. But I'll just remind you again for those who may not be clear on what they are. Qualitative data, remember, produces written, detailed explanations, whereas quantitative data produces numerical data. So numbers. So which one do you think interviews produce, qualitative or quantitative? If you could please pause this video and write down your response to this question on your piece of paper. Okay, Yanas, hopefully you would have had a chance to answer this question, and hopefully you would have written that interviews produce qualitative data. The reason being is the questions in an interview tend to be open question as opposed to closed questions, which usually produce quantitative data. So if they're open questions being used in interviews, and this will provide written and detailed explanations. So qualitative data is the answer. Okay, Yanans, your next activity is I will be asking you to create this table on your piece of paper. So if you could just quickly draw out this table. So as you can see on this side, I've got unstructured interviews and structured interviews. We're only going to be focusing on these two and the advantages and disadvantages. So like I laid out in the learning objectives, we are going to evaluate the usefulness of these two types of interviews. So if you could quickly pause this video and please draw out this table, as you can see on the board, onto your books. Okay, yeah, nice. Hopefully you would have had a chance to copy down that table. So on the board, as you can see, I've got a set of advantages and disadvantages. So I've already sorted them out into advantages and disadvantages. What your task is to sort these advantages into advantages for unstructured and structured interviews, and these disadvantages for unstructured and structured interviews. Okay, so we already know the advantages and disadvantages, but you need to sort them into these two categories. Okay, as a challenge task, what I would like you to do is have a go at this question. Why am I a semi-structured? So we know semi-structured interviews is in between structured and unstructured interviews. Why do you think they might be the best type of interviews? Okay, so please pause this video whilst you have a go at sorting these statements into the correct boxes. Okay, so I'm going to leave it on the screen, and if you could please pause this video and have a go at this task. Okay, yeah, nice. Hopefully you would have had a chance to sort those statements out into the correct box. So we're going to go through the answers now. So if you could have your pen ready with you to correct or amend your work. Okay, so we're going to start with structured interviews. So the advantages for these types of interviews is that it's easy to compare the answers, because most of the questions are closed questions. Okay, so structured interviews, we know that the researcher comes to the interview with a set of pre-written questions. Okay, so if they're asking the same set of questions to every type of respondent that they have, then it's easy to compare the answers because they're asking the same questions. For that reason, it's also quick and easy for the researcher. So that's an advantage. Some of the advantages for unstructured interviews: it may be more valid. Remember, valid is a key term that we spent a lot of time on in class. The reason being, it's more likely to get a true picture because people can answer in their own words. So remember, it's like an open conversation. So the respondent may feel more comfortable, maybe more likely to, be more truthful in the answers because they feel like they're leading the conversation. Okay, so in turn, that may gather more detailed, in-depth answers because they feel like they're able to provide their own explanation. They're not being restrained by the researcher. Okay, so this may produce qualitative data. So let's go through the disadvantages for structured interviews. So the disadvantage may be that you may not be able to gather detailed, in-depth answers because obviously the questions have been pre-written, preset, so that might limit the response that the respondent is able to give. They might feel a bit restrained in that sense. Another disadvantage that we may have to consider is social desirability. So people may lie or exaggerate slightly to give answers that make them look good to the interviewer. Okay. Finally, another disadvantage is it may lack validity. So that's another key word. Okay. May lack validity in the sense that the respondent may not be able to use their own words to answer the question because the interview is so controlled. It's pre-written. They might not feel like they have a lot of control over where the interview is going or the answers that they can give. So therefore it might be less truthful. The answers might be less honest. Okay, finally, the disadvantages for unstructured interviews. So one may be that it's very time consuming. So as you know, in an unstructured interview, there are no pre-written questions, but that can mean that the interview may go on for hours, okay, because the respondent is leading the direction of the interview. That it can take a very long time. It can be very time consuming. It can also be quite difficult to compare answers because there are no preset questions. That means each respondent is being asked different questions. So how can a researcher possibly compare those answers? That can be quite challenging. The final one, social desirability. People might give answers, again, this is similar to what I mentioned here. People might give answers that make them look good. They might exaggerate slightly so that the interviewer doesn't judge them or doesn't think negatively of them. Okay, so if you could please just correct your work, ensuring that you have sorted these into the correct categories on your table here. Okay, and that is the end of our lesson. If you have any incomplete work, please pause this video, play it again, and ensure that you are completing all the work that I've talked you through, just to ensure that you're not missing out on anything, and that when you return to class that you don't have any incomplete work. Please make sure that you're keeping your piece of paper safe so that when you return you can stick that into your books. Now, as always, if anyone has any questions at all, like, please email me or message me on Show My Homework, and I'll get back to you if there's anything you're unsure about. Okay, thank you, Yanais. See you soon.